Hi, good morning. So, for this lesson, we will be creating constructors and appreciating classes as data types. So, for today, we will be learning how to create some constructors and, of course, how to appreciate those classes as data types. So, I was able to introduce what are constructors from our last discussions. So, to define that and for you guys to easily understand what is a constructor, well, imagine you are creating a class such as employee class and instantiating an object with a statement such as the following. So, for example, here, employee emp1 equals new employee open close parenthesis. Now, this is an example of what we call a constructor. You are actually calling the employee class constructor that is provided by the default Java compiler. So a constructor establishes an object, and a default constructor is one that requires no arguments. So this one, like what you are seeing right now, is an example of a default constructor. It's actually created automatically by the Java compiler for any class that you create whenever you do not write your own constructor. So when the pre-written default constructor for the employee class is called, it establishes one employee object with the identifier provided. So the automatically supplied default constructor provides the following specific initial values to an object's data. So what are those? First of all, the numeric fields are set to 0. The character fields are set to Unicode. Again, these are the default constructors. So these are the initial values. Boolean fields are set to false. Remember, a default constructors, the initial value for Boolean fields are always set to false. Fields that are object references, for example, string fields, it's actually set to null or empty. Meaning when we say null, empty, there is no value in it. So any constructor you write must have the same as the class it constructs. And constructors cannot have return type, not even void. Constructors and methods are actually different. Okay? So when you are declaring a constructor, most of the time you are declaring that to be public. So when we say public, once again, we are actually declaring that class to be accessed by other classes outside the classes that you have created. Okay? So when you write a constructor for our class, you no longer have access to the automatically created version. So for example, this one. So we have here the package name. We have here the class name, which is the employee name, with a, what do you call this one, with a variable and a data type double. So take a look. We have here a public employee with have or which has a value of a 300.50 under salaries data type. So if you will try to take a look at this one, this actually doesn't look to run at all, right? Because there is no main method. Now, this is only the employee class that we have instantiated as a constructor from the main method itself. So this is actually the main class, where inside the main class, we have declared a constructor employee emp. Okay, employee emp equals new employee, meaning we will be calling the employee class. Okay, we instantiated the employee class using a constructor with a name emp, so that whenever you tried to access the employee salary, all you have to do is to simply use the emp variable here and call the variable salary from the other class. Since it's public, you can already access them easily. Okay? So, an introduction to using constructors. you can write any Java statement in a constructor, although you usually have no reason to do so. So you could perform a display message from within a constructor or perform any other task. You can also place a constructor anywhere inside the class, outside of any method. Now, there are times that programmers list the constructors first. In my case as well, whenever I create constructors, I usually list them first. So inside the main method, I list them first there so that I can easily see the flow of my program. You never are required to write the constructor for a class. So again, this is optional, but then Java provides you with a default version if the class contains no explicit constructors. Now, we also have to understand that classes are data types. The classes that you create become data types. So, just like we have seen earlier, the employee class, okay, it now can become what we call data types. So, programmers sometimes refer to classes as abstracts, data types, or ADTs. So, ADTs is a type whose implementation is hidden. That's why it's abstract. You don't have any idea what's inside of it. It's hidden and accessed through its public methods. So a class that you create can also become or be called a programmer-defined data type. In other words, it is a type that is not built into the language. A class is a composite type, that is, a class is composed from smaller parts. Now, let's take a look at the following. Again, Java's primitive data types are not composite. So I hope you already have an idea what are primitive types. Java has 8 built-in primitive data types such as integer and double. Primitive data types can also be called scalar data types. You do not have to define those simple types. The creators of Java have already done so. See, for example, you are using those primitive data types such as the integer and double. You do not have to define those because it's already being written inside the Java programming language itself. So when you declare a primitive data type object, you provide its type in an identifier. When you declare an object from one of your classes, you do the same. Now, for example, you declare an integer method, an integer name myInt, and an employee name myEmployee, then each can be passed into a method, returned from a method, or assigned to another object of the same data type. So let's take a look at this. We have here the main method. We declared an employee constructor, an employee object with the name emp. Now, we already know that we can actually call this one as, take a look here. We can also call this as something like this. So since it is a method here, kasi diba, the keyword new is missing. So therefore, we didn't actually created a new class, but instead we simply declared an object within a method. So take a look. We were able to call this one and print the value of getTax from here. See? So we have a main class here. Okay. Now inside the main class, we call this method, and inside this method here is we actually declared the constructor, which is the employee tempEmp equals new employee, which automatically created a new class here and will now return the value of tempEmp whenever the value of tempEmp here. So therefore, if we will try to call this emp getTax, it will automatically get the value of getTax from the employee class here. Okay, so do you have any questions so far? Okay, so in the next meeting, we will be discussing much further, and I'll be giving you some examples regarding this one. Some more examples regarding this one, okay?